Hi everyone. Here's my project where I'll be analyzing The Withered Arm by Thomas Hardy. I did my discussion post couple weeks ago about this, and I talked a little bit about um, like Gertrude being a succubus and Rhoda being a witch, and I wanted to expand a little bit more on that, and yeah. Right. I know we all probably read this story. For anybody who didn't, this story has about three main characters. Really, it's mainly following the women in the story. We've got Rhoda Brook, who is a milkmaid, and a few years prior, she had an illegitimate child with Farmer Lodge, and Farmer Lodge now has this new wife who comes in. She's very young and beautiful. And her name's Gertrude, who's the other main character. And basically, Rhoda is initially jealous of Gertrude, asks her son to kind of spy on her, get a feeling for who she is, where she came from. And she's very stressed about this, and this kind of turns into this sleep paralysis episode, where Rhoda's sleeping in the middle of the night, and there's some kind of demon-like creature that's sitting on her chest, and it looks a lot like Gertrude, but is very wrinkled, withered, old. And in defense of herself, Rhoda grabs Gertrude's arm and throws her off the bed. And the next day, Gertrude visits, and she's very kind, friendly. I think she was bringing some new boots for Rhoda's son. But basically, a friendship starts to build with them, and Rhoda discovers that Gertrude actually has this marking on her arm, and it happens to be in the same place that Rhoda had grabbed her that night. And then when they kind of compared, when Rhoda asked Gertrude about when that happened, it the time kind of compared to when Rhoda had that dream-like episode. So basically, this new illness, marking malady that Gertrude has, is really stressing her out. So she tries to seek a cure through folk magic. And it's not explicitly stated at the time, but eventually is revealed that when they go to visit this conjurer, it's revealed to Gertrude that Rhoda was the one who marked her. So basically, Rhoda moves away, and Rhoda and her son move away, and there's kind of a big time jump here, and there's 6 years later. Gertrude's still trying to find a cure for her arm. Her arm's gotten worse. It's withered away. She can't really use it, and stressing her out, stressing out her marriage. She hasn't been able to have a child. So she seeks that same, I think it was the same conjurer again, and finds out that there's a cure to change her blood, the constitution of her blood, some kind of alchemical magic. And he says in order for it to cure, for arm to cure, she has to touch the neck of a man who is just hanged for a crime. So yeah, long story short, she finds a hanged man eventually. It turns out to be Rhoda's now grown up 18-year-old son. Gertrude dies not long after from the shock of it all. And then not long after that, after Farmer Lodge, he, I don't know, becomes a little bit of a better person, but then he dies. And then Rhoda, kind of withers away and lives her days alone, still milking cows until her like hair falls out, and she's like very wrinkled and basically withered, like Gertrude's arm. Getting into a little bit of Halberstam's framework, Halberstam was a little more like focused on, I think, like society and like the way that like society molds us, if I remember correctly. So taking this quote from Halberstam, monstrosity and the fear it gives rise to is historically conditioned rather than a psychological universal. So a lot of the criticism that Hardy had in this short story, a lot of it is based on like the patriarchal society and gender roles. So yeah, like some ways that that shows up in the story is, you know, Rhoda's jealousy, projecting into that like dream event that happened. That part is a little bit like I'm a little bit unsure about, but like mainly the curse that happened because of that sleep paralysis episode. And then there's also the disfigurement with Gertrude and what that has to say about her insecurity, about being beautiful, staying beautiful, and like, you know, her new duties as a wife. And then also, you know, receiving affection from her husband and how that wanes after she's blemished and, you know, no longer perfect. It also ties into like the cultural and societal monsters of the Victorian era, especially in regards to contamination. Lots of, I think I'll get into this a little bit later in the slides. You know, a bit like diseases going around, and then also the like expectation to bear a child as a wife, so that fear of infertility. One of the log analyses that I found, I thought would be good to share with students, since it's pretty brief and it's pretty like to the point, is this analysis of the Withered Arm by Nasrullah Mambrel. And in this, the author really emphasizes Hardy's fatalistic worldview, and also shows that the characters are more propelled by fate. It's kind of going more with like that naturalism view that Hardy was pretty well known for. Some interesting points are how like Lodge's transformation. The text said, when the callous and indifferent Lodge changes into a chastened and thoughtful man, he leaves behind his estate to have a reformatory for boys, and he also leaves a small annuity to Rhoda. And this author gives a point that maybe his earlier cruelty had been the work of an evil force that's beyond his own control. So I thought this one was interesting because it brings a little bit more of Farmer Lodge into the analysis, which I didn't really focus on as much. So I think this was good to add on to it. Another blog article that I found that I thought was pretty interesting is this one by Georgia Tyndale. And it focuses more on the supernatural and the witchcraft that are in the works of Thomas Hardy. And I think Georgia goes over like several of Hardy's short stories, but I focus more on the ones that were relevant to the Withered Arm. So yeah, he often depicts witches and like women who are like just ostracized from society. There's also lots of themes of fate, purity, again, the critique of Victorian gender norms. Something this article pointed out that I didn't really catch on to was the dark hair of main characters. And in the Withered Arm, I believe it was Rhoda who has dark hair, and she's the one who's more considered a witch, at least along, like within her town. And yeah, and something else I thought that was interesting was the way Hardy presents witches is that he presents the accusations of witchcraft as like a societal reaction to complex women. The first of the academic scholarship that I wanted to add on here is this article by Anne Gagne, where she focuses on the telepathic touch in the Withered Arm. And something I learned in there is how the term telepathy was first coined in 1882. So this could be pretty relevant to Hardy, like when he was writing this story, because I think it was, I'm forgetting the exact year, but I think it was like within the same decade when Hardy wrote this story. And telepathy was defined as all cases of impression received at a distance. And we could see this in the dream sequence in the Withered Arm, where, you know, somehow these women are interacting from a distance, whether you believe that like Rhoda came spectrally and was able to curse Gertrude while she slept, or if you believe that Gertrude was actually the one who came and attacked Rhoda. Either way, there was some kind of telepathic connection here. And something that really ties in with this is the Victorian fears of venereal disease. And there's like a bad touch rhetoric. And what this article shared about this is there was a Contagious Diseases Act that happened in like the 1860s, because venereal diseases were like running rampant, and they were spread through what was called like the bad touch, just implying like sexual relations. The interesting thing was that only female bodies were required to be examined, which kind of implies that, it's women who are responsible or impure and not the men. This article also pointed out how like hands and arms are symbolic. And this is shown like from the beginning, where Rhoda asks her son to like notice if her hands be white. She's wanting to see if Gertrude is like a worker or if she's more of like nobility. Also, obviously, Rhoda's curse happens through her touch. And also the markings on Gertrude's arm are in the shape of Rhoda's like fingerprints or handprint. And then also this article brought up the fact that it's both touch that causes Gertrude's affliction, but also in her cure, where she has to touch the hangman's neck to like turn her blood, that also goes too far and is the cause of her death. If I choose to like focus my final project on this story, I would definitely like to go more into like the relationship between Gertrude and Rhoda, because they do seem to have like a much stronger bond and relationship with each other than either of the women has with Lodge. And so I found this article by Abby LeBlanc about Sappho's influence in the Withered Arm. I mean, also like, and Thomas Hardy in general was like a really big fan of Sappho. And in the time that he wrote this, I believe like there were like some newly translated fragments of Sappho's poetry being published in like 1885, and then also in 1895. And this the scholarship goes into like the sapphic undertones in Rhoda and Gertrude's like dream, like calling it like a bedroom scene. And I thought this was interesting because in my original analysis, I um, I argued that maybe Gertrude is actually a succubus. I took like a little bit more of like a literal approach to it. Where I believe like in the text, I'll have to find the exact quote, but I believe that the text calls her like an incubus, which is like the male equivalent. But yeah, and this is interesting because it's not explicit in the text, but the succubus is usually a spiritual being that's associated with sexual desire. And then also like anyone who's read Sappho knows that it's like like she wrote about like the desire between women, and like the gender roles in ancient Greek mythology and like society were very different than in the patriarchal Victorian society. So Hardy's not really able to be explicit in this way if this is even, something that he was meaning to have in his story. But yeah, that's something I'd like to explore more if I end up developing this into an essay. So if I decide to expand on this into like a full project, um, I noticed that a lot of the interpretations of this story really focused on Rhoda as the only supernatural agent. Um, so I would like to do a little more research and perhaps argue that Hardy is depicting Gertrude also as a supernatural agent, and that she also has supernatural powers as a succubus or maybe even like another witch. Um, and yeah, that's also shown with, her withered arm, embodying the anxieties that I already talked about earlier. And then I'd also maybe like to get into the unconscious psychic connection that links the women, and maybe like emphasize the fate in their downfall. So here's my proposal for developing it. I would include everything that I've already talked about on here, a lot from my discussion post as well. But I do feel like I would need to gather some additional textual evidence that Gertrude was supernatural, since Hardy did in his text focus more on Rhoda as like the perpetrator of this. I'd like to, find some kind of evidence that Gertrude has some kind of autonomy or like power herself. And there's also the counter argument that I'd like to develop too, that maybe the dream is just Rhoda's projection. And also, like, what motive would Gertrude have for attacking Rhoda, or is she even conscious of it? And I'd also like to find more connecting to Hardy's broader theme of fate, and then also explore Gertrude and Rhoda's relationship as fated, like whether that's, in the romantic sense or otherwise. But anyway, this recording's gotten really, really long. So thank you if you've actually listened this far. And yeah, please give any feedback that you can to help to make this project better. Okay, thank you. Bye.